Hi, and welcome once again to the Architecture of Change. This week we are a little cozier than usual, um, because the topic is from gatekeeping to gateway building. And the reason I want to talk about this topic is it's twofold, actually. And the reason why I'm going to call it twofold is because when you think about systems, we think about their evolution. And the question is, the whole arc of this series is equity and evolution. So when I think about it, what do I think about? I think about how do systems evolve and stagnate over time? What happens when we treat equity as a MO, a way of being, an evolutionary force that reshapes how opportunities flow as opposed to solely the destination? And I think when we kind of get to that space and we start to kind of interrogate that question, we always come to this part of all of the systemic levers that have been created and used to gatekeep, to create, and when I say, an elite, small concentration of power, or a smaller group of people with a high concentration of power, but that group is very, very small. And the language that we've used to justify and perpetuate it. And I think in the last episode, I talked a lot about conflations. And conflations are a very, very difficult semantic system to unpack and unpick, but also from a psychological perspective for us to be able to decouple certain principles. And when it comes to DEI, there has been loads of different conflations, and this is what makes it even more difficult. But in general, the concept of equity has been conflated with it being anti-meritocratic. So you're getting this job because of a particular characteristic, but that has nothing to do with the fact that you can actually do the job. So we've kind of put those two things together. And as we're seeing a lot of anti-DEI sentiment, it's always coming back to the problem is DEI because we have people who cannot do the job. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been a lot of organizational mistakes in the past 5 years. There have been a lot of organizational mistakes. A lot of organizations have been more focused on the optics of progress and equity and have made the mistake of promoting people unfairly, which has then led to damaging both the underrepresented, minoritized, and marginalized group, the person in the position, and the future groups. And also, it has supported the claims that DEI or DEI hires or people who come from particular backgrounds are actually incapable of doing the work. There has been that mistake, and we cannot deny that there has been that mistake. But if we take it a step further and look into the foundations of this, the foundations of meritocracy, although it's meant to be merit-based, are completely bound within patriarchal, racist, ableist, you name all the discriminatory ists. Meritocracy is very much bound in that. And that has led to consistent gatekeeping of access or to access people to opportunities, to, to just the general mindset of, being able to demonstrate your skill and your skill being recognized or it really being believed that you've done it. And I think we can take any amount of gender studies A woman makes a suggestion, it's ignored. The man says the same thing later on and is credited with the thought. You know, this is all part of the process around gatekeeping. But actually, when you kind of sit down and think about this even more and in more depth, what also comes to mind for me is if we're trying to move from gatekeeping to gateway building, certain profiles get to be part of this group, as we know, the dominant profiles. And I always talk about you cannot designate yourself as being an ally. You have to have that confirmed by the group that you're meant to be helping. And based on that alone, if you're in these situations, if you're in that gate kept space, this is where allyship, if it's genuine allyship, can be almost, supercharged, double charged, because it's not just about speaking on behalf of others who may not be in the room. It's also about really challenging the systems around you and questioning the basis of, in some cases, meritocracy. In my book, Closing the Gap, How to Include Black Women in Any Gender Equity Strategy, I do talk about this concept of the fallacy of meritocracy and how deeply ingrained that is and its impacts, because it's not just this is an exception. This has become the easiest way to continue to gatekeep. As people pedal back on their beliefs in equity, they fall into pushing meritocracy without really questioning the basis of meritocracy as it is. And I think that for me is where, for all the people who kind of want to shout and scream and say this is terrible, the question is, we always talk about this in each episode around individual impact, collective impact, corporate impact, societal impact. What are you doing to exercise your agency as an individual to start to create these kinds of changes? How am I, as an individual, going to create a different pattern to ensure that and I shouldn't really use the word as big as legacy, but I can't, pathway, gateway building pathways. The pathway that I'm creating for others is as easily accessible to everyone. Because equity as a concept can feel very distant if you cannot necessarily perceive the challenges. You might not recognize that you live in a gated community. If the community is so large, so spacious, you might not realize that there's somewhere outside. So it comes back again to the question of what is it that I am willing to do as an individual, recognizing the opportunities that I have benefited from. How can I take said opportunities and pass them forward in a meaningful way, not just to people who look like me, but to people who may not naturally get access to the spaces and places in which I exist. And what do the patterns look like? What do the patterns look like that got me to where it got me? And when I ask my peers who have a very similar experience, what does that look like? So where do we continue to see the similarities in experience? Where do we continue to see the similarities in leverage? Where do we continue? And this can go in many, many places, from university, from sports clubs, to where you get invited to socialize. The list is endless. But a lot of the times there are so many parts of our work and personal life that we sometimes don't recognize as having innate privilege, because it's innate, you don't see it. what we take for granted is sometimes for others a huge deal. And that's how we can sometimes start to consider and start on that journey of interrogating, like, when I look at myself and my friends, when I look at myself and my colleagues, what is it that we all have in common that's led us to this place? And sometimes there might be other people who have got to the place, but their journey's been different. And that's also another conversation, another part of the interrogation. What do we have in common? Do we have the same business school in common? Do we know somebody who's the hiring manager? Did I get here because of my network, or did I get here purely because of my CV? There are so many ways for us to start to, whether it's a question of funding for your business or whatever it might be. A lot of us, and I think most of us, do not recognize our own privilege and what we could give back to create new gateways, to create new pathways. Because it's always easy, and this is just human behavior, it's always easy to see what we don't have, but we don't always see what we do have. We don't always see the privileges of circumstance, the privileges of connections, the privileges of so many different parts of our lives just because you're here. And it doesn't negate the fact that you've worked for it. But success does not happen in a silo, number one. And number two, there are so many people who have contributed to your success in many different ways. Sometimes we don't realize that that is not normal. We don't always realize that. And in parts, when we're looking at this kind of situation and looking at your individual journey, I think that's where you can start to see these small levers of what was key in my evolution to having access. What was a game changer for me? And could I, in my position, could I repeat that? And if not, why not? Because in the end, these interventions create a completely different opportunity flow. They create a different mindset also. Because I think in recognizing the support, if you've gone to business school, no one else did the studying, but no question about it. But you might have had mentors, fellow students who just supported you through the hard times, etc. But I think when we take a step back and start to realize that our success has been a combination of many different factors, not least the support from others, I think it opens up our mindset to being more abundant and saying, you know what, I'm prepared to pass and give things forward in a way that I'd never considered before, because I didn't necessarily take the time to sit down and appreciate what it is I was receiving, and how effective it really was in making me the person I am today. And I think that sometimes is the difference and the key to being able to pass it forward, irrespective of who you are. But in terms of wanting to be an active ally, is also really looking at what are the unidentified, outside of the obvious, what are the unidentified factors that have allowed me to continue to get access and opportunity in a way that others do not. And the other reality is that just because you speak up and you say and you try and do, it doesn't always mean that you're going to have that same support system to be able to create the positive impact, let me be clear, the positive impact in the way that you had anticipated, but it shouldn't also be a point to make you stop. And I think the desire, I would say, I always think about how can I create positive impact for one person? One, it's a start. And that one person is not me. It's a start. How can I do that? Um, because sometimes we want to make loads of changes for loads of people, and that's beautiful. And I think it's an amazing goal to have, but sometimes the reality is a lot more confined. Sometimes the reality is you can't make as many changes as you would like, because maybe your organization doesn't support it completely. Maybe the situation, the firm, whatever it might be, it's not always supported. So I think, part of this is also being aware that resistance comes in many forms, and resistance comes in not just many forms, but comes from many people. And you might be surprised who resists the most. And the discomfort around the changes that have oft been spoken about, but you decide to make the desired changes a reality. Because that also makes a huge difference. It also makes a huge difference to how people perceive you, how they interact with you. There was a live that I did many years ago, or maybe it was just a short video, which was talking about what's the difference between an activist and a change maker. And a lot of the times it's just perception. And people use the word activist a lot of the times in the negative, and a change maker in the positive. And sometimes it's as simple as that, is that some of the people in your environment might see you as an activist and they don't like it. But if it was less, quote unquote, radical, they would see you as a change maker and somebody who was really for the good. Whereas when they label you an activist, it seems too extreme. And that might be a title that you have to get used to. It might be something that feels uncomfortable, that feels challenging. But this is very much part of building new pathways, new gateways, new bridges, is that you will be charting a path sometimes that it might be there, it might be overgrown, but it will not be without challenges, and it won't be painless. I don't like to say that, but it won't be. And I think that, as we move forward, it's also about looking for what change is possible within your framework, within your scope. Can I change the workplace for one other person, one colleague, one person who's entering into the business? Can I do that? Can I change the path for one founder? And if so, what can I take from that? And sometimes it's going on these journeys allows us to see where the real challenges are, because this is the other part, right? Sometimes it's like with everything, you have your perception of what the challenges are, but once you're there in the midst of it, you're like, oh, okay, there's also this challenge. Oh, there's also that challenge. And it's kind of going on that journey to build with whoever it is you're trying to help, and not just build for, to get to know intimately what the challenges are, whilst also sometimes having to challenge yourself when it comes to having to look at a different reality. Because gatekeeping, and to go from gatekeeping to gateway building, means knocking down barriers and creating new constructions, which is a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work. But being intentional and saying, this is what I want to do, because it is necessary for the many, not just the few. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did. You know, is a large job to undertake, but it also is, you know, sometimes I think of conversations that we have, right? And we have so many conversations outside, and we forget ourselves to let ourselves be inspired by each other, to learn, to brainstorm. And some of my greatest inspiration has come from informal conversations, not even within the work context. You know, yes, people who I have worked with, but not even talking about work. Thinking of new ways to work, thinking of new ways to collaborate, thinking of new ways to innovate, to really push forth on this idea of creating systemic change. And it's not always even in a linear way. Sometimes it genuinely is a random thought that sparks several more thoughts that you keep going back and forth with, that others think, yeah, do you know something? I can be part of this. I'd like to help. How can I help? What can I do? And part of this is to say, despite the challenges that might be ahead, it's also remembering that there are so many people who want to collaborate in ways big and small, but all meaningful. And that, like with everything, gateways build communities. Gatekeeping isolates communities. But gateways build communities, build pathways, create expansive mindsets. And all of that can happen when we're willing to experience some discomfort to get to that point where we have real change. So I hope that, you know, it really motivates you to think about, on an individual perspective, you know, what are the benefits that I have had during my career, during my life thus far? And how can I pass some of them forward? How can I be for the next person what XYZ person was to me? And how can I ensure that I keep doing that and keep encouraging those who I help to want to continue to help, so that the virtuous cycle is one that is expansive in mindset, abundant in mindset, but also I don't want to use the word sustainable, but, you know, is continuous in its application, and is still very much equity focused and aligned, in as much as it still continues to recognize systemic challenges whilst also encouraging navigation, if the system has not yet caught up to where we are. Because as we know, today's designs can be tomorrow's reality. So we have to keep on designing and keep on planning to then implement that to get us to that next stage and that next phase. So thank you as always for tuning in, and I look forward to your feedback and some questions actually before I go that I want you to think about. And this one I think is I like this question only because I always think of this statement. What did they say? Your net worth is your network, or your network is your network. Anyway, so here's the question I'm going to leave you with. What would it look like if our networks evolved as fast as our equity aspirations? So that's the question I'm going to leave you with for food for thought. But coming back to, you know, today's designs can very much be tomorrow's reality. So let's keep being architects of change. Let's really continue to deconstruct systems and keep pushing that self-interrogation, and that intellectual curiosity, so that we challenge ourselves as much as we challenge those around us to think differently, to learn differently, and to be open to the possibilities that are there for us all. So yeah, have a great day and thank you as always. And don't forget, tune into the other episodes and like, subscribe, enjoy, and